This is a Chinese monster for high-speed construction. The machine lifts a concrete beam of thousands of tons, stretches itself from one bridge support to another for 40 meters, and installs it by itself. This is how fast China is building a bridge that for the first time on the planet will carry trains at a speed of 350 kilometers per hour directly over the sea. And here they have also learned to build skyscrapers in 19, hospitals in 10, residential buildings in 24 hours. They've built high-speed railroads from scratch, bigger than the whole world put together. Stadiums, tunnels under the sea, 100-kilometer bridges. Stop. Everything I've just outlined can be summarized in 1 second. How China went from a poor village to the world's leading builder and investor. And why is this just the beginning? Like this video and watch it to the end. Well, to get an idea of the real scale of appetites, let's look at the whole map of Africa. Which countries on the continent do you think have Chinese construction going on right now? All of them. Nigeria got $5 billion for a huge hydroelectric plant. The biggest bridge in Africa is being built in Mozambique with Chinese money. In 2017 in Kenya, a 500-plus kilometer-long railroad was being built at 700 meters a day. Even on the islands of Cabo Verde, the Chinese have managed to build housing, a dam, a stadium, and a local parliament building. Zimbabwe, by the way, also has a new Chinese parliament on the way. Now pay attention. How much money does China make from construction in Africa? In 2003, it was $2.5 billion. That's not bad, but now it's 25 times that. Every year it's almost $50 billion a year. Why China? Why Africa? It makes sense. There's little money there, but lots of opportunities. This is where the Chinese are testing their skills to conquer the world, without guns. What are the main advantages of Chinese construction? 1, they do it faster than anyone else. 2, they do it the cheapest. And 3, they're happy to build on borrowed time. Now here's a concrete example of what faster and cheaper means. Look, there are drilling machines. Now in China there is a boom in building tunnels for high-speed railroads, subways, and all in some pretty brutal conditions. They are digging a direct route to Tibet, inside the mountains at an altitude of several thousand meters, where there is simply not enough oxygen. Or the longest tunnel under the sea. With this technique, the work moves at a rate of 10 meters per day and costs only $10 million per kilometer. To compare, in the United States, the same 1-kilometer tunnel would cost $50 million. Why do we have to borrow money? I'll explain with a concrete example. In 2008, Sri Lanka, a favorite of many tourists, ambitiously decides to invest in its own development and build a new deep-water port. But it has no money of its own. Relations with the West are so low, and in the end the port is kindly agreed to be built by who? The Chinese. Naturally not for free, but at a percentage, but the development and business in the port didn't go well, and it turns out to be unprofitable, and then Sri Lanka has to pay over $1 billion on the loan, and as you remember, there's no money. But the Chinese are kind guys. They are ready to forgive the debt, but on condition that Sri Lanka will lease the port to them for 99 years. And in 2017, Sri Lanka agrees. That is, they actually give part of their territory, albeit small, to another country. I think the Chinese methods are clear. As our President John Adams said, there are 2 ways to conquer nations. One is by the sword, the other by debt. China usually chooses the second. Second, how did China make such a dramatic step forward, and how much more power will it have? If you remember, in the middle of the 20th century, everyone admired the Japanese economy, technology, construction, and then everything stopped abruptly. Let's go back 40 or 50 years. We're building skyscrapers at a rapid pace, and we have Chinese builders coming in to consult. They're only going to build a subway in Beijing. So they came to learn, or as the future history will show, to cut off all the good things. China is a country of nothing special. Planned economy, portraits of leaders, communist slogans. Even at home in Asia, things are going much better in Korea, Japan. It's a real economic boom there. But watch the numbers. They'll tell you everything. In 1980, 70% of the people in the US were already living in cities. That's about 10 million people. In 1980, the same 200 million Chinese in China also live in cities. But the difference is that the Chinese population in 1980 was not 230 million but a billion. So 800 million out of that billion is an impoverished village. They live on less than $2 a day and work inefficiently. As they say, people are the new oil. So this oil, free, that is very cheap labor, was plentiful in China. They just had to figure out where to get it out of the Chinese fields and put it to work. And in 1980, the new Chinese leader Deng Xiaoping decided to make an experiment. Before that, he visited Singapore and was shocked at how well it turned out to be possible to live and develop there. And what follows is our favorite story about how a fishing village of 30,000 inhabitants, this time Shenzhen, turns into a Chinese Silicon Valley of 12 million people in 40 years. How did this happen? Deng Xiaoping creates a free economic zone in Shenzhen for foreign companies. What does China offer them? Well, first of all, Shenzhen will be built and developed only on your guys' foreign investments, because we don't have the money. We only have 1 billion hands. And for these foreign investments to come, foreigners are exempted from duties and corporate tax. So if there's no profit, you pay nothing. If there's profit, you can rest for another 5 years. We'll wait. There are a lot of additional economic discounts, baits, but that's not the point. Secondly, everything that will be produced in Shenzhen will be exported, as they say, for hard currency. And thirdly, Shenzhen was not chosen by chance. Look across the street from Hong Kong and Taiwan, where the smoke of economic development is billowing, and China is sitting on the tail of that smoke. Because for the next 40 years, Shenzhen's GDP is going to grow at 20% a year, and from $40 million to $400 billion. What does this have to do with construction technology? What about the story of the Chinese construction workers coming to the US to study? The Chinese have a genius move, that all the builders themselves come and bring money and technology. Well, here's a good example. 2005, both China and the US have one problem in common. The distances between cities are long, and you can't travel fast enough. They need high-speed trains. They don't have them. That's the problem. Let's look at how the issues are being addressed in different ways. North America's fastest train is currently sitting in a warehouse in Philadelphia. The next generation Acela Express train won't be carrying passengers for at least another year. That follows an October report from Amtrak's Office of Inspector General, OIG, that says the train's hydraulic systems are leaking, couplers can rust from running water, and windows sometimes break. In principle, it's better to let it stand in such a case. What is China doing? They don't have high-speed railroads. They don't have their own normal trains. What do? Let's turn to proven foreigners, but not just buy, but bring the technology to us. China will invest a whopping $300 billion in high-speed rail over 17 years. And as I said, China will build 40,000 kilometers of high-speed rail from scratch. That's more than the rest of the world combined. It's the same story with building skyscrapers. The Chinese love them. They've built as many in the last 30 years as America did in the 20th century. And if you look at the top 10 tallest buildings in the world today, half of them are Chinese. It's clear that all mankind has done throughout history is measure the length of opportunity. So, as soon as these opportunities appear, you want to show them off as much as possible to make them visible. That's why every Chinese metropolis has its own record holder. Shanghai, Shenzhen, Guangzhou, Tianjin, and Beijing. But 7 years ago, the Chinese decided to show not only how high they could go, but how fast they could go. They built a 57-story skyscraper for 8 million people in the city of Changsha in 19 days. But then, all of a sudden, China decided to ban skyscrapers. You can't build anything over half a kilometer anywhere. In smaller cities, the ban will be on heights of 250 meters, or even 100 meters. Why did they decide to cut everything like this in a country where the population is already 1.5 billion people, and it seems that there is nowhere without high-rise construction? Well, first of all, look how this whole 91 meters of concrete glass in Shenzhen cracks, and people run away from the skyscraper. It turns out that the race to build faster and higher has led to a safety problem. And secondly, think about it. Over 40 years of uninterrupted development, China has produced hundreds of millions of rich citizens who want to live in comfortable green cities instead of concrete jungles. And it's no longer a situation where the majority of poor villagers just move to the city in search of a better life. For a better life and a better principle. Now there is money and technology, and it has to be applied somewhere. And the example of Africa shows that China will turn economic influence into political influence. Poor countries will need technology, infrastructure to not lose to their neighbors. They will need to build it, and that's where China will come in. China with its speed, cheapness, and credit. But whoever takes the risk to fit in could become the new Kenya, Sri Lanka, or Ecuador. Why Ecuador? A few years ago, the Chinese quickly built a hydroelectric plant there. But after a while, there are dangerous cracks, downstream farmers, constant flooding, and a $1.7 billion loan. And every year Ecuador has to pay $125 million in interest alone. Now, friends, Chinese wisdom, where all these figures of huge profits from Africa come from. China has invested $300 billion in African construction. But most of the factories, plants, railroads, ports, dams that are built with Chinese money remain because of debt, remain in Chinese ownership. Millions of Chinese are already working there, but all this good is serviced by local budgets, and the locals themselves, if they work for pennies. Chinese expansion outside will only gain momentum, because inside the country, resources are already stretched. 65% of the population lives in cities, about the same as in the United States in the 1980s. China is repeating US history, investing in technology and building domestically, but in a stunningly clever way. So be strong and invest in yourself and your future, and see you on Simulated Reality.